Hey, I'm Laura, and today I'll just be reviewing a bunch of romance books I read. So, I will say I don't normally read romance. However, at the beginning of this year in January, I read a bunch because I had hoped to make a romance Valentine's Day themed video in February, and that failed miserably. So, you may have seen I posted a video recently reviewing The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I was like, oh, I should get back into posting and try to post something soon after. It's currently 3 weeks after. That was a miserable fail. Anyway, though, so while I don't normally read romance, I would like to review them, but just be warned, this isn't really a romance book channel. So whether that's good or bad in your opinion, now you know. Anyway, I decided since this is kind of a wrap up with multiple books, I will try to do star ratings. That being said, I don't particularly like star ratings. I think the content of a review is much more useful and important than the actual star rating. However, just to give you the gist, 1 star is this book sucks and I hate it. 2 stars is this book is bad but had some redeeming qualities. 3 stars is for an average book. 4 stars is the book is good but still had flaws, or it's average but I bumped it up because I liked it enough that I personally felt it deserved 1 more star. And then 5 stars is the book is flawless, or I loved it even with the flaws to the point where, yeah, it earned that 5th star. So the first book was the first book I started and completed within the year, and I completed it on January 6th. And that is Ever After by Wendy Logia. And as you can see, if you recognize the cover, it's the movie, literally the movie cover with the actresses' names for the film Ever After. So I am a huge fan of the film Ever After. I love that movie. So I originally got this just because there's like no fan merch for that movie. And I was like, well, okay, I need to have it. Actually, I have one other fan merch. I also have this pin, which is literally the exact same cover. So, yeah, there's very limited fan merch for that movie. Let me read the blurb. A prince in search of a princess, a domineering baroness, and her 2 daughters, and an orphan servant girl who sleeps in the ashes by the fireplace. By the time Danielle is 8 years old, her mother and father have died, and she has been left in the care of her new stepmother, the Baroness Rodmilla of Ghent. 12 years later, the Baroness and her 2 daughters have made Danielle their servant, giving her the nickname Cindersoot and ordering her every day to chop firewood, tend the grounds, and clean the manor house. When Prince Henry of France begins a search for a wife, the Baroness intends to make sure her beautiful daughter Marguerite becomes the bride. But when Danielle and the prince meet by chance one day, sparks fly. The Baroness will do everything within her power to keep her servant from becoming the Queen of France. Based on the classic story of Cinderella by Charles Perrault, Ever After is a historical romance that is certain to charm and delight modern readers. Just to tell you about the story, I love this romance. It is a historical fiction Cinderella retelling, which features Leonardo da Vinci and discussions of Thomas More's Utopia novel. One of the things that makes this romance work for me when I don't normally like romances is that the relationship isn't just the characters being like, oh my gosh, he's so hot. Oh, she's so hot. Or the characters just talking about how much they love each other. This story focuses on how they help each other grow. So I do think Danielle, the Cinderella character, doesn't have as much of a character arc. I think she's pretty like secure as she is as a person. Henry, the love interest, is the one who needs to grow and take on responsibility, because the story starts with him not wanting to rule France and just wanting to be free and adventure. And then Danielle's like, hey, like, what you have is a privilege, but also you have a responsibility to your people and to be a good king. And they discuss what like the duties of leadership is to the people, and she helps him grow and see this not as a burden but as an opportunity to help others. And she like helps him become more compassionate to others and to take his responsibility seriously. So that is why I love this romance so much, because I think what I like in a romance is when they do help each other grow as people. But what they talk about, it's not like their romance is just based on being like, oh my gosh, I love you so much. They like intellectually challenge each other and help each other grow and to think. And then even though I don't think she changes as much, he is there to show her love and compassion in a way that she hasn't experienced before. Yes, she, like, this Cinderella is not like isolated and alone. She has staff who she loves and works with. So she's not like really as sad as some other Cinderella retellings. She actually seems relatively fine at the beginning. Like, yes, she is a servant, not being treated like perfectly well, but she doesn't really seem that upset about the chores. She's more upset at the disrespect that her stepmother and stepsisters have for like her father's estate and how it's falling apart. That's more of her issue. But then when she meets the prince, she sees an opportunity for more and starts to rebel more, and then it becomes more of an issue, but then she's able to find love with him. So yeah, love this story. Highly, highly recommend. So the movie, perfect, 5 stars, amazing, favorite romance movie ever. The book, it's fan merchandise, and it honestly is such a great film. And I was like, okay, I have to get all the merch essentially. And normally I wouldn't read essentially adaptation of a screenplay, because, well, if I see a movie and I love it and I find out it's based on a book, I'm like, yeah, I gotta read the book. But if I find out a book was written based on a movie, I'm like, why would I read the book? The movie predates it. That doesn't make sense, because I feel like often in that case, the book doesn't really add anything. It definitely came across as less detailed than the average book. And honestly, it gave a bit of middle grade vibes with the simplicity of the prose. And while it did make me feel nostalgic for the middle grade princess books I read growing up, I can also feel nostalgic reading an adult book. I have felt that way before. And also, though, I don't think it has the same level of like depth as a book that was originally intended to be the book. And also, I don't think it's as good as the best middle grade princess books I read, because there's nothing against middle grade fiction. It can be really great. Reasons I would recommend the book. 1, you're a super fan of the movie Ever After and you want the merchandise. 2, you want to have a copy of the book because it is so much like the movie. In case like you want to watch Ever After, but there's a power outage or the apocalypse happens, easily put this in your backpack. You have a non-electronic, no electronics required version of Ever After on your hands, and you can enjoy it whenever you want. Okay, I'm being a bit silly, but while this book is so true to the original movie, it doesn't really add anything. It is a very faithful adaptation of the screenplay. But to be fair, I literally, when reading it, was just watching the movie in my head. And so I had a good time. I was just watching Ever After through the book. I could imagine every scene perfectly. I could imagine the background music. I may be a little obsessed with the movie, so I probably enjoyed the book more because of my love of the movie. And also, before I get into some more things about the book, I just want to show you, this is literally the VHS cover we had growing up. But if you look at the back, it has shots from the movie. And my favorite part, the end pages have like black and white or sepia and white and black photos from the movie. And dude, I love that. And it's like an old book with yellow pages. It smells like an old book, and I'm all here for that. So yeah, I love this as a piece of merchandise. And I enjoyed reading it, but I probably would just watch the movie instead of rereading it. However, most interesting part, I'm pretty sure this has deleted scenes that were from the original screenplay included in it. That or the author just decided to add scenes, but I get the impression these were originally intended to be in the movie, but then cut because they're not necessary. So they aren't necessary in this, but it's kind of cool to see like, ooh, was this originally intended? And like the thing is I could see them as canon. Like they're just like extra stuff, but I can believe they're part of the movie. And in a way, now when I rewatch the movie, I'm gonna be like, that happened. Okay, they're super small, but I'm going to tell you at least, I think there were only 3. That's what I remember. One is a scene with the stepmother, Baroness Radmilla, when she's alone with Danielle's father after first arriving at the manor, before he passes away, obviously. And it's just them talking. But in that scene, we learn that Radmilla's husband, who previously died before she married Danielle's father, was convicted of treason. And there's a scene of like her and the father like kind of flirting with each other. And she even at that age mentions how the king has a prince about her daughter's age. And she's like already planning it out. So that's kind of interesting to get to hear, especially that her husband committed treason previously. That makes sense why she left and married beneath her so quickly. The plot thickens. Anyway, the second scene added is, I feel like, an expansion on a pre-existing scene. So Baroness Radmilla and her daughters are buying a brooch, and it's for Marguerite to wear to try to attract the attention of the prince. In the movie, she's buying it from this kind of like sketchy guy, but in the book, it's expanded upon. In the book, she's actually in an alley, and Jacqueline, the daughter who is the less favorite, she's keeping watch, while Radmilla and her favorite daughter, Marguerite, are looking for the brooch to buy, and Jacqueline is snacking because she's a foodie. And some rich ladies, she forgets to like warn them in time, and these rich ladies show up and recognize them, and they're like, oh, what are you doing buying jewelry from this sketchy alley? And Radmilla's like, I'm buying it for the servants because I'm so generous. And they're like, ah, oh, Radmilla. And it's like, it's kind of funny. It's like, girl, she played that off pretty well. Marguerite could never. And then the last extra scene I remember is the king, the father of the prince, and Leonardo da Vinci in the king's, like, in like a room with like a bunch of like, I think it's Leonardo da Vinci's like temporary room, if I remember correctly, but I'm not entirely sure. And they're like playing with a parachute. The king's like tossing the parachute out. And Da Vinci in this scene convinces the king to let Prince Henry choose his own wife by the end of the week during a ball. I think it's a week. And instead of forcing Henry to be in an arranged marriage with the Princess of Spain. So I will admit that these extra scenes are pretty small. They don't add too much to the story. I had originally hoped there would be extra scenes, but what I was hoping for is a scene after Henry proposes, but before like the wedding, where she talks to him about what she's been through, because she's been through some crap, and we never really get a scene where they're like are talking about it, but that's fine. I also had hoped that maybe the book would have the wedding on the page because it's not in the movie, but no, that's fine. Oh, spoilers, the Cinderella retelling, they get married. But at the end of the day, I still enjoyed the added scenes, even though they were pretty inconsequential. So I would only really recommend this book as a collector's item, though. I would much more recommend the movie, because I feel like without the actors to elevate the scenes, and with how the narrative part is so simple, while the dialogue is just as good, the narrative reads very young and simple in a way that makes the story feel more childish than it originally did. Whereas in the movie, the actors are so good, the background music is amazing, the visuals, it's just such an amazing story. So I really would just recommend this as a collector's item. And I gave this book 3 stars because I would say it's pretty average. Like, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's also not necessarily anything like elevating for it. It's just kind of, okay, it's fine. I started this one at the beginning of the year because I was like, I bet this would be a really easy read. And I haven't been reading as much as I had hoped since college, essentially. And so this is only 184 pages. So I thought it would be a good motivator to like get me to complete a book pretty quickly and then move on, which it did do that. But yeah, so that is Ever After by Wendy Logia. So the next book I read is The Wolf and the Hawk by Julian Greystoke. So this is an indie novel. Julian Greystoke is a YouTuber. That's her little like icon for her channel. And I will link her channel below. I really enjoy it. She does reading and writing related things. And so yeah, I finished this book on January 19th. So I will admit that I did beta read this book years ago. So I know the author enough that I beta read for her and I like her personally. I will say I have read books by people I like and absolutely hated the books with a passion. So I don't think that me liking the author makes me biased, but I want to be upfront about that. And I did read a rougher draft of this, so it was kind of cool seeing the final version. But disclaimers out of the way, I want to start with Julian's books as a whole. I really love her fantasy books, and they feel nostalgic for the fantasy books I read growing up in a way where they don't read like middle grade, like the Ever After book I read, but they have that sort of, I don't know how to describe it, as much as like they aren't as doom and gloom as a lot of the books I've read as an adult. They're very like fun adventures. They actually are like enjoyable stories that tend to have like good endings that make you feel good. And another thing is like the writing style feels like very appropriate for fantasy. It's not really influenced by the more modern YA writing style, and I really like that. And the stories aren't super overdramatic with like, oh my gosh, the world is ending, and oh my gosh, the main character is the most powerful, amazing person to ever be powerful and amazing. Like, they're about real people who feel like real people, but they aren't like the most special person to ever be special in the whole world. So let me read the blurb. Ryoni is the wolf of the Vern, the war leader of her nomadic clan. When she is promised a marriage to Alexander, the Hawk of Ged, she imagines she will become his war queen. She expects to lead his soldiers and defend the farming kingdom from the supernatural threat called the Thra. When Ryoni arrives, she finds her new husband handsome, mysterious, and utterly indifferent to her. He's uninterested in including her in his life, especially in the war room. Frustrated and thwarted, Ryoni struggles to fit into this strange kingdom and win over the man she hopes to help without letting her temper get the better of her. When a fearsome attack cripples Ged's army, Ryoni will have to rise to the challenge. But will it be too late for her husband? Ta-da! So this book, as someone who doesn't normally read romance, I really enjoyed it, and I think it could appeal to people who don't necessarily like a lot of average romances. I think one thing I like about it, and like about this story in general, is I think what I enjoy in a romance is when the characters, yes, fall in love and get to know each other, but first of all, it's not lust-based. The book isn't constantly like, oh my gosh, she's so hot. But also where I feel like the romance, their relationship involves like a central theme where they develop and grow together. So this book does follow a warrior woman who's leaving her clan, which is a nomadic clan, but she goes to this small kingdom, this small farming kingdom, and it's not like, oh my gosh, this is like crazy. It feels like it actually is meant to reflect like how a lot of kingdoms historically were actually small, pretty quaint, and I actually really enjoyed that vibe. This book it takes place in early spring, so that's when I read it, but I could see it being appealing in either early spring when the winter is first thawing, or in the fall when it's first starting to get cold. This book feels very grounded in reality. Yes, there are some fantastical elements, not too many though, and it's very character driven, focused on Ryoni and Xander's developing relationship in a way that feels realistic without ever feeling tropey. I would say The Wolf and the Hawk, while it does read as an adult book, I would say it's appropriate for teen readers and could be enjoyed by them. But I will say it is an adult book about an adult character. There's nothing explicit or inappropriate, which I like because I think a lot of people, they think adult book just means like cussing and explicit content, and that's That's not correct. And I think this happens a lot because a lot of books people are writing read like YA, so they add gratuitous explicit content to be like, no, this is adult. See, I added the gratuitous and explicit content. Whereas this book doesn't read as YA and doesn't have that content. Ryoni feels like a grown woman who, yes, is in a new stage in her life and has to find a way to fit in, but she's already fully developed in her beliefs and who she is as a person. She is also my favorite character in this book. She's a tough warrior, but also can be kind and silly. She has a tapestry in her room in the castle, and it has a depiction of a hunt happening with like all the hunters horseback following the dogs chasing a stag, and one of the hunters is blonde, which reminds her of her husband, and she addresses the blonde man on the tapestry as her husband when she's annoyed at him, which I thought was a little weird and charming and just like a cute little detail where the character Ryoni, she doesn't take herself too seriously at all times. She can like take herself seriously, but we're allowed to have a little bit of fun. And it felt like kind of like having her have a little bit fun in a way that still felt very grounded and not like the book was like trying too hard to make her quirky. Ryoni's very talkative and not afraid to poke fun at herself, but she is like a competent warrior and leader. And so I think she's not easily categorized as a trope. She just feels like a well-rounded person. My only critique I could think of with her is I do think that she adjusts very easily to the new kingdom of Ged, having previously been from a warrior clan where she led men and women into battle, including berserkers, to being in a kingdom where her expertise in battle is blatantly ignored and she's expected to just let the Gedi men run things. And she seems to know a lot about Ged and never accidentally does something improper or offensive that causes conflict. And the Verm are constantly said to be more emotional people, whereas the Ged are a bit more stoic. And her friends like will fight each other and like shove each other casually because that's how they show affection. It's very like jokey and like common. But she always seems aware of what is appropriate in Ged. So my issue isn't that like psychologically she's able to adjust. Like that's fine. My issue is like you would think there'd be a bit more like accidental things that she does that is offensive to the Ged. There's a couple times where the Ged does something accidental that she's like, oh no, that's not correct. But she never, I don't remember her doing something. Like you would think she would like shove someone in a joking way to be affectionate, and they're like, my queen just shoved me, what do I do? So that's the only thing. And I think that her ability to adjust so well also reflects how the middle of the book, the pacing slows, which I personally can enjoy slower books, and I enjoyed this one. I think it's done well. And I personally never felt bored, but I think that is something good to know because readers don't always enjoy that. And I think if she had a bit more conflict with trying to adjust to like what the Gedi expect and finding a middle ground of like, okay, this is what I feel like is integral to myself. I'm not compromising on that, but this other thing, you know, trying to like find a middle ground where her and the people of Ged can like connect with each other in the middle. I think that could have been emphasized a bit more. And if it had, I think the middle of the book would have felt a bit more action-packed. But to me, I don't think this technically counts as a cozy fantasy. I think cozy fantasy can't have battle scenes, and I don't think anyone can ever die. But to me, it kind of did read a bit cozy. So I like enjoyed that. So Ryoni is from the clan of the Vern, and being a wolf in her clan is essentially the second in command who leads the warriors into battle. In the Vern culture is a nomadic warrior culture that comes across to me as being inspired by both the Mongolians and the Vikings. So kind of like a combination of them, while still being entirely its own. I feel both Ryoni and the Vern defy stereotype, being written with care and nuance. They may be a warrior culture, but they aren't characterized as brutish and prone to violence. I really liked hearing about their views of the afterlife and them believing they join a great hunt in the afterlife where they ride on horseback with their ancestors and can watch over their loved ones who still remain on Earth. Their culture definitely loves riding horses, and you can tell the author is a bit of horse girl. The horses is also Ryone's horse Storm has a personality to himself and feels like a real horse. He's not just like a prop. So well done with that. I would expect nothing less from a horse girl author, though. But anyway, the belief of the Great Hunt painted Ryone's thoughts and views of the world, and I really enjoyed how immersed I was in her culture through her character, despite the book taking place in the kingdom of Ged with its own entirely different culture. Ryone is such a complex and fully realized character whose culture paints her worldview while still feeling like entirely her own person. She has two friends who join her when she comes to Ged, Aesra and Scran, and they're both berserkers who have their own subculture within the culture of the Vern. This book does a great job demonstrating their similarities as Vern while still giving them each their own distinct personality. I know I keep talking about culture, but I want to emphasize that this is not ever info dumped to the reader, but instead interwoven throughout the story organically. I feel one of the main themes of the story is two cultures blending, which is why I'm bringing it up so much. But instead of telling you, hey, this is the theme, the book simply just shows you it through the characters and their experiences. I also enjoyed how this book takes a very optimistic approach to this. There is confusion and awkwardness at times between the characters not understanding each other's culture and some having preconceived notions, but they generally approach each other with understanding and respect. I think Ryone is a great perspective for this because she is the outsider, but she is also genuinely kind and open to others and wanting to learn. I feel like a lot of stories emphasize the villains, that I really enjoyed how most of the characters in this book were good people trying their best and trying to get to know each other. I just think Ryone could have made a bit more mistakes. I do like how she was trying. I think she could have made a bit more accidental mistakes. I also enjoyed the writing style of this book. It's third person limited, but every word felt like it came from Ryone, our protagonist. The voice in the story further developed Ryone and to an extent the Vern. The writing style is simple and straightforward, but every metaphor in the story sounds like one Ryone herself would make, either connecting to her experience in battle with the metaphor. The evening came in like a charging warhorse, and Ryone did feel a bit trampled, or the metaphors connect to her life growing up in the nomadic clan of the Vern. She leaned down to the priest and tried to whisper, but the sound still carried like smoke on a wind. Or the metaphors will often connect either to nature or animals. They're playing chess in this quote. She pushed another pawn out like a duckling following its sibling. I'm sure there's better examples, but I wasn't tabbing them while I was reading because in my head I'm like, I know there's this really good one, but I can't find it and I can't quite remember when it was. But a lot of these are just very short snippets within the story that give Ryone's voice, that bring Ryone's voice to life. The story isn't particularly flowery or poetic in its language, but I do like these little use of metaphor and how deliberate they feel in that every single one I feel is one that Ryone herself would say. It doesn't feel like a modern author putting in her own metaphors that we would use. The metaphors all come from Ryone. Overall, I enjoy the setting. Ged is a traditional small medieval kingdom with an old stone castle and tapestries, but I think it is done well. There's small touches, such as how in the early spring, Ged is a very misty, damp kingdom, and I felt really immersed in that atmosphere. Also, the castle is decorated with a lot of antler and pine boughs, which not only feeds into the atmosphere overall, but also characterizes Xander, the king who chose how to decorate his own castle, and in a way demonstrates how both Ryone and Xander love nature and hunting, and it's a small detail that shows that they have more in common than they would originally think. And I will say, though, that Ged is definitely a fantasy kingdom, and they do have a pantheon of gods, so it's not entirely like just medieval. I will say I don't think that Ryone has much of a character arc. In fact, I think the love interest Xander is the character with the most important character arc, which I realized after the last review and then this one, I think actually works quite well in romances if done well. I think that it works in this book because Ryone meeting Xander is the first step in his growth as a person. and she is the one to challenge his wrong ideas. Xander is a good, complex love interest, and I want to see him grow as a person. His flaws are all a direct result of his upbringing, which I liked. Also, he has long hair, which isn't necessarily my personal taste, but I just imagined him with hair like Link from Breath of the Wild, which made me like his appearance more. And I just need to tell you that I was imagining Link's hairdo from Breath of the Wild, though he's taller than Link. I liked Bryony and Xander as a couple. I enjoyed reading their relationship develop, and I'm pretty picky about book romances. I don't like most of them. Often I find myself rolling my eyes at how characters fall in love. Even if I do want them together because I like them separately, I often find how they become a couple to be stupid and cringy. Not to be a hater. However, I actually did really enjoy reading Bryony and Xander's relationship develop from butting heads to love. Every scene with them felt like an important step in their relationship that allowed me to believe they were growing closer. I also like how the relationship connected with the external threat of the fantasy monsters called the Thrall that often invade in the spring once the winter unfreezes. So I did enjoy how their romance wasn't just like, I love you, I love you. They actually had like a tangible thing they were working towards together as king and queen, and Xander had to learn to let her in to help to succeed at this thing. I will say there is one time though where Xander is helping his people in a way that I'm like, would a king be doing that? And I think it does stem from how I think Julian Greystoke as an author, she tends to write down-to-earth, working-class people. And so while Bryony and Xander are royalty, she still kind of writes them as that down-to-earth, working-class people. And I think with Bryony, it makes sense because Bryony does help the servants, but she comes from a nomadic clan that's specifically created as everyone chips in and helps with everything. So to Bryony, that's normal, and the servants are like, why are you doing this? This is kind of weird. However, with Xander, you would know the scene if you've read the book. I feel like it's not only something a king would not normally do, but it also made me go, dude, don't you have like an army to be preparing for an attack by the Thra? Like, Bryony is being excluded from a lot of things, so she needs to find things to do and is working to try to get to know her people because Xander isn't really introducing her to them. Whereas with Xander, it's like, Xander, you have more important things to do, which is actually called out at one point, so that's good. But I do think that his priorities could be a bit better. And while I do actually like the scene, I enjoyed the scene in itself, it does call into question some of the things because the scene was very enjoyable. There may be a cow in it, which is personally very relatable because I grew up with cows. But logistically, I do question it. Though I'm like conflicted because part of me is like, does that make perfect sense? But another part of me is like, this is literally what makes the book feel so nostalgic and like wholesome and what makes me love it. So I'm like conflicted emotionally about that scene because like I love the scene. But I'm like, what are you doing, dude? But I think I lean more towards I love this scene so I can accept it. I think also Xander's very outdoorsy and likes nature, and I'm trying to be vague just because I don't want to like explain his entire character to you. But his family, like his father and his brother who we meet and we hear about his mother, they all seem more like snobbish and into luxury and like appearances. And part of me wonders how Xander found this passion for the outdoors. I understand that you can find a passion outside of what your family enjoys, but part of me wonders is if as a kid he had some sort of like mentor figure, he introduced him to hunting and would take him outside, and Xander grew to really love that sort of thing. I mean, I assume his father and brother would also go on like hunts because that was a thing royalty would do. And maybe Xander really fixated on that and enjoyed that. But I do wonder why Xander ended up more like compassionate to like the lower class and into these outdoorsy things unlike his family. I do find that interesting and feel like there's like more to his backstory that we don't fully get to know. The side characters don't get as much page time, but they each have their own personality. And with how many side characters there are and with how limited some of their page time is in the story, they're all unique from each other and we're easy to tell apart, which I think is really good because I've noticed a lot of books recently where I'm like, who are these people? I don't know who any of you are. Too many side characters, and this book balances it perfectly without like having to constantly reintroduce you to these characters. Like, it does a really good job with balancing them. Also, this book made me emotional at one point, which doesn't normally happen. I teared up. It did not leave the bottom lid of my eye, but I did tear up a little bit. And it was specifically a point to do with one of the side characters. This may be partially related to me beta reading this book, because when I beta read the book, this side character had like a little subplot with them. I'm being vague. And I felt like in the original version I beta read, I didn't get as much closure surrounding this side character and their subplot. And unless I'm misremembering, and that actually did happen, but I don't remember getting the closure. And then when I read the final version, finally, I didn't read it right away because I had just beta read it. When I finally read the final version and I got that closure, I actually did feel kind of emotional. I was like emotional in a happy way, and I hadn't realized that I had cared so much about this character until that moment. I didn't realize I needed that closure until I finally got it, and I felt this sense of relief and happiness for this character. I was like, okay, where did that come from? I did not expect that. So it made me emotional in like a more like happy, like touch way, not like in a sad way. And because of that, I was like debating if this book was like a 4 stars or 5 stars, but because of that, if something makes me like that emotional, that is not like normal for me, it bumps up to 5, because I think first of all, I don't really have any like issues with this book. I think it does everything pretty well. It can be a bit slow, but yeah, if a book makes me feel that strongly, it goes up 1 star. I've read a 3-star book that I bumped up to a 4 because it made me really feel strongly. And this book, I would say it's like a 4. I don't think it's flawless, but I do think it is better than average, with the caveat, personal taste. But yeah, I think it does what it wants to do well, and it made me emotional, so I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads. I also liked how the antagonistic characters were done in this story. They weren't anything crazy, but I feel like a lot of villains are just like straw man, over the top villains, and they don't feel like real people who suck. They just feel like caricatures, which I don't enjoy. I think in a lot of ways it adds kind of like a negativity to a lot of stories where you're reading it and you're like, this is clearly a straw man of this person who sucks. So now whenever I read your book, I'm going to be thinking about the straw man person instead of your actual story. And it like ruins the immersion for me. If it's a straw man for like an actual real person, immersion ruined. If it's a straw man for a type of person, even then it's like not my preference. I like my characters to feel like characters. They want them to feel like real people. They can fit like these flaws. It's not that you can't write these type of flawed characters, but there's a way to do it without breaking my immersion. I liked how the antagonists in the story, not the Thrall, which are just like kind of like mindless fantasy villains. They're fine. They're mindless fantasy, like physical threats. That's cool. You can't really mess up with those. I liked how the more human antagonistic characters weren't just pure evil, but they just kind of like sucked and were not good people. They were kind of crappy, crummy people, but they weren't maniacally evil, doing evil things just for the sake of it in a way that would be like, why are you just doing this? And I also like, though, how the way they were antagonistic was personal, specifically to Xander. I liked how it was a more personal antagonist as opposed to just like having them do everything bad, but kind of just like generic and could be swapped out with someone else. And overall, this book, and really all of Jillian's books, focus more on the good guys than the bad guys, which I feel like also leads to the nostalgic vibe I got from them, because I feel like a lot of the books growing up I read were more focused on the good guys and like them growing, and I really enjoy that. I think it does lend itself to like the feel-good vibe I get from the story. Yes, there are antagonists and the characters are affected by them and have to deal with them, but the story really is about like the good guys and their relationships developing, and it really adds to this like happy, cozy vibe I get from these stories. So to wrap up all my thoughts about this book, I really enjoyed The Wolf and the Hawk. I don't think it qualifies as cozy fantasy, like technically, but it's cozy for me. I loved Ryoni as a protagonist. I found her charming and funny. She was my favorite character in this book. And Xander was a compelling love interest, and I was definitely rooting for both him to grow and for them to be a couple. As someone who's tired of romance that is either insta-love or annoyingly lustful, there's slower burn romance where two people go from strangers to butting heads to love hit the spot perfectly. I would definitely recommend if you want to read a romance but you're kind of sick of the very like tropey, like insta-love lustful romances. I think this book does it great. And finally, I actually started this story about the same time I started The Wolf and the Hawk, but I finished the entirety of it after. And I finished it on January 26th, and I read the entirety of Lore Olympus. So I have these first two physical volumes. I got them years ago. I got it as a gift from my dad, which was really sweet that he got it for me. And I got it years ago because I just thought it was a cute story. And I kind of went downhill for me. And by the end of it, I did not like it. And I think part of it is now that I'm older, the initial part that was better didn't appeal to me as much as I liked it when I first read it. It wasn't like a new favorite, but I was like, this is fun. Like, it's cute. There's colorful characters. But then rereading it, I feel like I've matured a bit in my taste. And I'm like, eh. And then by the end, I was like, I don't have anything I particularly like about this. I'm just reading it to finish it and so I could talk about it. So this is a webtoon on the Webtoon app. And I'm going to just review the entirety of the webtoon at once. I'm not going to divide it because I can't remember what happens in which volume or season. That's too much to keep track of. So while I have these two physical volumes, I decided the webtoon wasn't good enough for me to just like get all of them. So I read it on Webtoon and I didn't pay any money to read it. So I got that going for me. I will say when I put it on Goodreads, I marked each of these as a book because I have the physical book and I read them. But then I just added season 2 as one book completely and season 3 as one completely. So technically the like later parts of season 1 are just not marked as read on Goodreads. But I don't know. That feels the most accurate technically to what I did. I don't want to like mark season 1 as read when I already have like 2 books marked within it. So I don't know. Anyway, let me know if you think I should just like remove these from Goodreads and just put season 1 as one book or what. But anyway, I don't know. Let's get to the review. So I would say this webtoon is both famous and infamous, at least among webtoons. So there's many in-depth videos about it, and this is just a reading wrap-up. So I'm going to try to be quick. I'm not going as in-depth as a lot of those reviews go. But also I want to say I am going to spoil this because, like, I don't necessarily... Because I want to spoil, okay? Like, I'm spoiling it. I will link timestamps below if you want to skip to the next thing. But first, I'm going to read the back of the blurb. Scandalous gossip, wild parties, and forbidden love. Witness what the gods do after dark in this stylish and contemporary reimagining of one of mythology's best-known stories from the creator, Rachel Smythe. Persephone, young goddess of spring, is new to Olympus. Her mother, Demeter, has raised her in the mortal realm. But after Persephone promises to train as a sacred virgin, she's allowed to live in the fast-moving, glamorous world of the gods. When her roommate Artemis takes her to a party, her entire life changes. She ends up meeting Hades and feels an immediate spark with the charming yet misunderstood ruler of the underworld. Now Persephone must navigate the confusing politics and relationships that rule Olympus, while also figuring out her own place and her own power. This edition of Smythe's original Eisner-nominated webcomic Lore Olympus features brand new exclusive short story and brings Greek pantheon into the modern age in a sharply perceptive and romantic graphic novel. So this is a Hades and Persephone's retelling, as you could tell from this. So in this retelling, the Greek gods are cute and colorful characters, kind of like Disney's Hercules, where Hades is blue, which I love Disney's Hercules Meg. I think a lot of people who love Lore Olympus hate Disney's Hercules for making Hades a villain, but Lore Olympus isn't accurate either. So like I can deal with like inaccuracies, as long as they're just not like stupid. But I love the idea of making the Greek gods colorful because to me, I think one of the things that's appealing about this story was that the characters weren't just like generic, like normal looking people. There was like the pink goddess of spring and the blue god of the underworld, and I thought it was just visually fun. I think if you're making a cartoon, like the characters don't have to look like normal people, and that appealed to me personally. I also think it's really cool how in this story, Olympus and the underworld are essentially modern day with modern day technology. They have cell phones, they dress like modern day. She's going to university, while Earth is in the era of ancient Greece. So when the gods go to Earth, they change into traditional Greek clothing, which I thought the premise with that dichotomy between Olympus and Earth was so cool. But unfortunately, I did feel that aspect was a bit underutilized. At the beginning of the story, there was beautiful, colorful, and interesting composition of panels. I don't think like the characters were ever technically the most structured or consistent, entirely consistent. They were a little bit more consistent at the beginning. But I think that the overall like image of the panels was really lovely to look at. But it's unfortunate because by the end of the story, I feel like that lovely, like colorful, pleasing composition really like faded away, and it was just like generic different colored characters like in like torso shots talking to each other most of the time, which was unfortunate because I feel like what was originally appealing about the story and the artwork was those compositions. So the art does kind of go downhill. You can't just make a character pink. And like, even though I was just saying how I like how the characters are like pink and blue and different colors, you can't just make them that color and make me enjoy it. You have to like add some interest with how the colors are used. And so like this scene at the beginning when Persephone first wakes up in the underworld, I think does a really good job utilizing like the color contrast. So she's this bright pink person in the underworld, which is like very dark and blue, and it really adds this contrast that I think is very lovely. So, and I think it adds this contrast that I find very lovely. And I think also what is interesting about that is also at the beginning of the series, if you notice in some of these scenes, like she's glowing, and that kind of stops happening by the end, which is unfortunate because again, I think that was really visually interesting. Also, for another scene later in the second book that I think is really visually cool is this one with the rain. Hades is like going through the underworld, and that one at first doesn't have as much contrast until he finds her, but like I think the use of the colors was so good in these original panels. I think that was part of the reason why I really enjoyed this. Like, look at these colors. It's so pretty, and the pinks and blues. I'm just trying to talk because I want to show you like the different panels, but yeah, I think it's really nice at the beginning. And it's unfortunate that the story kind of changes into more of just like headshots of characters talking, because I think this is where the story really shined at the beginning. Besides the art, when it came to the writing, the beginning of the story was very silly and cutesy and kind of gave like a rich people drama vibe. But I still found it enjoyable, even though that's not my normal thing. It probably would not have appealed to me in the form of a novel. I think because it was a more visual comic thing, I took it a little less seriously because it doesn't take as much effort to read a comic as it does a novel. So it being a cutesy, silly story with cutesy and silly looking characters who are pink and blue, I'm like, okay, I'm here for that. Like, I don't need my bright pink character to be in the most serious story. Like, it's fun. The art and the story went together with that cute vibe. Then at the end of literally volume 1 of season 1, there is an assault scene, which is very serious, not cutesy at all. And I thought that scene, which is a really heavy topic, was done really well and portrayed in a really respectful way. And so there is, like, you read it and you're like, yeah, this author can do good. She can write good story. But unfortunately, I do feel the story devolved into kind of a mess. So the story always had the issue of an age gap romance, which Hades is a centuries old man and Persephone is 19. And I think if she had been about 100, the story would have still worked and it still would have been an age gap, especially for gods. But it's like, you do an actual teenager, that's kind of weird. And when I first read it, I was younger, so it didn't, like, I mean, I was never into age gaps. Like, when I was younger, people would be like, oh, look, Chris Evans is so hot. And I'm like, isn't he old? Like, I don't care. So, like, I'm not really someone who, like, I was always aware of, like, that sort of thing, and I never found it attractive. But I feel like at first when I was younger and I started reading this, I kind of was like, okay, well, they're immortal, so he's not going to die of old age when she's, like, in her 50s and she won't be sad and alone forever. So it didn't bother me quite as much at first. And so when I first got into the story, I was there for the pretty art and the cool concept, and I originally overlooked that. But the story ends up making sure to remind you of the age gap every chance it got. And he ends up becoming her boss in an internship. And her character fluctuates between painfully naive and not understanding the phrase sleeping your way to the top, thinking that it means that she's actually just like napping her way to the top. But then when another character says Haiti just wants to get in her pants, she knows what it means and is offended. So she's like inconsistently naive, and then it's constantly reminded to you, and then you're like, okay. And then when rereading it older, I was like, okay, yeah, that was always an issue. Also, Hades and Persephone are both bad people. So at the beginning, Hades is dating Minty, who is a nymph. That is his girlfriend. And Hades emotionally cheats on her at the beginning with Persephone, and both Persephone and Minty knows he's doing this. It's weird because I'm pretty sure in the original myth, Hades cheats on Persephone with Minty, but in this version, it's flipped because I guess the love interest cheating on the heroine is bad and unforgivable, but the love interest cheating with the heroine is good drama. I feel like cheating is used as drama a lot, and like, I'm not a fan. Hades gives Persephone favoritism at work very publicly. He pays her when interns are normally unpaid. He announces her arrival when he never does that. And he shirks off his job duties multiple times to hang out with her. When other characters criticize this, they're the bad guy. One character, Thanatos, complains about it to a girl who becomes his girlfriend later on. And she's literally like, why do you care? And Thanatos is speechless because, oh my gosh, that's such a good point. And then it's later revealed that Thanatos is Hades' adopted son, who he abandoned emotionally and just pretended didn't exist the moment he became a legal adult. And that is treated like its own, like it's an own on Thanatos. Like, oh, Thanatos, you're one to talk about favoritism. Your dad, you work for your dad's company. Who cares that he like ignores you only ever talking to you to yell at you about how much you suck at your job. And now he's parading around his barely legal girlfriend. And if she screws up at work, that he's just like, oh, it's okay, baby cakes, it's fine, you're the best. No, you're a hypocrite because you work for your dad, and that's nepotism, even though you're literally the god of like the dead or death, and that's what you were born to do. No, that's favoritism thing. It's always you're a hypocrite. Like Persephone never gets yelled at by Hades, but you know. But apparently it's an own on Thanatos. Also, it's later revealed that Thanatos had a fling with Minty before she and Hades were exclusive. So technically, she did not cheat on Hades, which is extra weird now that Hades is his adopted dad. And I think the fact that Thanatos was his adopted son was just completely unplanned, because why would you write that otherwise? It's like kind of weird. Speaking of Minty, in my opinion, she has the most potential of any of the characters in the story, and actually starts off pretty interesting. She is Hades' girlfriend who is emotionally abusive and insecure, but she has potential to grow. We see her toxic friendship with another nymph who sets her up to fail. The moment Minty ever gets her life almost in track, that girl's there to try to screw it up. We see Hades' sister-in-law Hera call Minty nymph trash, which probably explains why Minty doesn't want to be around them. We learned her mother was neglectful and would just party when Minty was growing up poor. And we learned that Minty cruelly blows off Hades at the beginning of the book when they're going to Zeus's birthday party, because she finds a ring in Hades' pocket that he was going to propose to her with, when they aren't even an official couple and they're not exclusive because she told him she didn't want anything serious. And then she finds this ring in her like unhealthy coping way. She just like pushes him away by being a jerk because she can't deal with it and she doesn't know how to talk about her feelings, which I feel like actually is a kind of interesting character. And after that incident, Hades ends up in a tabloid with Persephone because she ends up at his house and he drives her home. It's kind of an accident that she ends up there. But he also gives Persephone a fur coat that he had originally got to give Hera, his sister-in-law, as a birthday present. And when Hera said she didn't want it, Minty was like, oh, well, can I have it? And Hades was like, no. And then he gives it to this like girl he just met 2 seconds ago immediately. And it's like, oh, that's kind of messed up. Like, dude, seriously, I don't blame her for being upset about that tabloid. Like, even if nothing happened, the fact that he gave her that coat, it's like the thing when people say, like, if he wanted to, he would. Like, Hades is, like, does not really like her that much. And then when Hades comes back to work and Persephone is the new intern and he is openly flirting with her in front of everyone. And Minty gets jealous because, like, that's kind of messed up. And then Minty gets jealous and tells Hades that she wants to actually try to be exclusive. And Hades agrees and they try to be exclusive. Minty immediately breaks off her fling with Thanatos the moment they become exclusive, while Hades keeps flirting with Persephone. Then Minty's frenemy gets her drunk, so she misses her date night with Hades, and then Minty snaps and yells at Hades and slaps him. And even though her slapping Hades was definitely wrong, we're in her head seeing her thoughts where she's like, why am I doing this? I can't stop, which to me makes her such an interesting character, reading about someone who knows what she's doing is wrong but is struggling to control herself. Like, I want to see her overcome that. Like, it's interesting to me. And the thing is I don't want Hades to stay with her. They're not good for each other. They're not healthy. I want to see her get control of herself and become a better person. And I like that. I thought she was an engaging and flawed character, and I feel like allowing us to see in her head kept her from just being a shallow mean girl and was like, okay, no, this girl has her own struggles. And originally I heard she was written as bipolar, but then the author decided to say she wasn't anymore because writing the mean girl as the only neurodivergent character didn't go over well. And I just found the direction Smythe took Minty's character disappointing, where she was turned full bad and like just shallow as opposed to someone who was struggling. And then Persephone turns Minty into a plant, and Minty is like trapped as a plant for 10 years, which is horrifying. Like, I have no mouth and I'm a scream type levels, horrifying. And when Persephone is finally able to turn Minty back into a human, Minty's like mad at her and Persephone's like, I'm busy, get over it. And it's like, what the frick, you suck, Persephone. And then Minty like just ends up having to get over it. Like we have one chapter where Minty like ends up like helping raise like orphan or struggling girls as a teacher. And I'm like, okay, I guess like you just were tired of writing her character, I guess. And all of this plays into one of my most hated things to be included in any story, and it's in this book, and that is protagonist-centered morality. Minty is bad for slapping Hades, and when she slaps him, we're treated to a scene where we see him holding his kid version's hand, and his kid version's like, I'm scared when she's like this. But before that scene, 2 other female characters slap Hades, and those scenes are played for laughs, and in ways like they're somewhat justified in slapping him. They slap him for flirting with the barely legal Persephone, which, to be fair, like, that is a better reason to slap him than you're mad at him because you missed your own dinner date. However, this book is very inconsistent when it comes to how violence is viewed, and it's very selective about which violence is okay and which violence is bad, depending on who is committing the violence. If we like who's committing the violence, it's fine. If we don't like who's committing the violence, then it's bad. One of the characters who slaps Hades is Hecate. She slaps the absolute crap out of Hades, hitting him multiple times, and it's portrayed as a lot harder than what Minty did, and also it's portrayed as funny. But Minty's one slap is not considered funny. And I don't know why Hades would sometimes have flashbacks to his child self, but other times not. And so it's just inconsistent. But then also, in a previous scene, Hades and Hecate rip a satyr's eyeball out of his face and then beat him within an inch of his life for being the paparazzi who took a picture of Hades and Persephone when he left his house. Hades and Hecate smile when they beat this satyr and revel in it. But then when Hades gets slapped, he's emotionally traumatized, and Hecate is really upset and tells him to take the day off. I'm sorry, someone who revels in committing violent mutilations of others is not the most sympathetic when they get slapped. Yes, Minty is wrong for slapping him, but more because her reason is bad. Like, he ripped a guy's eye out. He kind of deserves way worse than a slap. And Hades is the king of the underworld, and this is just like a regular working class paparazzi, and I'm not a big fan of paparazzi, but like Hades literally tortured a guy. Like, he deserves to get the crap beat out of him. Like, he's a horrible person. Yes, domestic violence is always bad, including against men. I don't know. I don't think in real life mob bosses who rip people's eyes out and beat people an inch from death are the people who are victims of domestic abuse. I think those are the type of guys who are committing the domestic abuse. And so this leads to this inconsistency where I'm like, who is Hades' character? He feels like two separate people. And then this book is like, sometimes violence is comedic and sometimes it's not. It's just not consistent, and it's hard to really get invested in it when it's so inconsistent. Also, when Hades rips that guy's eye out, it's portrayed as him defending Persephone's honor. And it's one of those things where it's like, oh my gosh, he ripped a guy's eye out to defend her. That's so hot. And when he tells Persephone this, she doesn't like that he did that. And she tells him to return the eye because, you know, they're gods, it's magic. And they go to the hospital to return the eye. And the scene is played like a silly shenanigans type sitcom scene with the two of them dressing up as scrubs and sneaking into the hospital room. And it's like, okay, what is the tone of this story? Then when the satyr is not fawning over Persephone, thanking her so much for getting Hades to return his eye, when she came into the room giggling with his attacker, of course he's not fawning over her. She's clearly buddy with a guy who ripped his eye out. Persephone ends up getting annoyed at the satyr for not fawning over her. And when Hades tells Persephone to leave the room so he can return the eye, the satyr gets scared and asks her not to leave him alone in the room with his attacker. And Persephone is just like, I would have, but you were rude. What the heck? Like, girl, she's constantly portrayed as like the nice, innocent, good girl who doesn't want people to get hurt, but she's a horrible, selfish person. Like, why would he fawn over you? You're buddies with his attacker, and now you're abandoning him with him? It's dumb. There's other issues like that too, such as Persephone's backstory is that she massacred an entire city of mortals, and that's why she went from the name Kor, which means maiden, to Persephone, which is bringer of death, which is accurate to the myth. Her name did change. And according to her version of the events, it was an accident, and she supposedly feels really guilty about it. But then when Minty reports Persephone and her mother for the crime and the cover-up, Persephone then gets enraged at Minty and turns her into a plant. That doesn't sound like someone with a guilty conscience. It sounds like someone pretending they feel bad because they got caught. When the warrant for Persephone's arrest is first released, before Persephone turns Minty into a plant, Persephone goes on the run. And after almost going into a coma in a junkyard due to stress, which honestly, that scene was kind of like a cool concept with her like powers like overwhelming her and her essentially almost going into like a coma that could have lasted for centuries. Like, that's kind of cool. Like, I like that creative idea. There's some really cool creative gems in this story. And it has a lot of potential, but I digress. After that, Persephone just lives with Hades and has free reign in the underworld with him, and they go on a glamorous shopping spree. Like she doesn't read like someone with a guilty conscience. She's just having fun and flirting with him. And then during the shopping spree, Persephone is like, oh no, Hades, capitalism, which is such lip service. Persephone is a rich heiress to the barley fortune. And then Hades is the king/CEO who joked about using slave labor of dead souls, which may have been a joke, but I'm not sure. But anyway, the comic is literally the fantasy of the rich, powerful boyfriend, and it's like about a bunch of rich, powerful people who are the gods. And then the author just puts in like, oh yeah, but capitalism bad, which just makes Persephone into a massive hypocrite. Either write a story that's actually critiquing something or don't put in lip service that just makes everyone look stupid in the story. Like, commit or don't commit. Anyway, at the shopping spree, they kiss, and the next day, Minty goes to a yoga class, and at the class, random side characters are talking about how everyone is talking about how Hades and Persephone kissed. And how amazing the kiss was, and how they ship Hades and Persephone, and that Minty sucks and needs to get over herself. And I'm like, what? Like, what am I reading? Is this the webtoon, or did the author just like take comments from the comment section and decide to like give them to random characters in the story? It feels like the side characters' lives revolve around Hades and Persephone, and it's so obnoxious. Like, why are they like, girl, we ship them so much? It's like, why do you care? Why is the working class so invested in Hades and Persephone's relationship? I don't get it. You know what? Maybe it's like Taylor Swift, but he's like a CEO. And it's like, Persephone's an heiress. Hades is a CEO. It's not like either of them are celebrities like Taylor Swift when everyone got super excited about her dating that football player. No, it's just some random CEO. I'm like, why? Oh, and then Minty gets mad and like accidentally reveals that she like exposed Persephone. Like, she told Zeus about Persephone's crime, and then Persephone turns her into a plant because Persephone doesn't really feel that guilty. And she's like, my life has been torn apart because of you. It's like, girl, you're going on a shopping spree with your rich boyfriend. I don't believe you. Also, while Persephone is living with Hades after her warrant, we learned that Persephone and Hades met once a year before the start of the comic, which Hades forgot because he was drunk. And in this flashback, Persephone turns into a butterfly, and then when she is spooked, she turns back into her human form and falls on top of Hades naked. Which gives me such like male character falls on female character's chest vibes, but in an even more explicit and creepy way, with a naked 18-year-old falling on top of this drunk old man. Like, why was that included? Also, after the guy's eye is returned, Persephone sees Hades in his true form, and the rest of the scene just focused on how turned on Persephone is by Hades' true form, and how her powers are going crazy because of how turned on she is. And I'm like, what is this emotional whiplash that's happening? Okay. Anyway, all of this happens within a week or two, and then there's a trial. Persephone gets banished to Earth for 10 years. There's a time skip where they're reunited, get married, Minty gets a half-assed redemption arc, and the bad guys are defeated. The end. Also, part of me wonders if the time skip was to get Persephone in her 30s before she marries and sleeps with the centuries-old Hades. I also want to touch on how I've seen this story referred to as a feminist retelling, but the story character assassinates Demeter, Persephone's mom. The oldest recorded myth of Hades and Persephone is the Hymn of Demeter, where Hades kidnaps Persephone while she's playing with her dolls, and the myth is about Demeter trying to find and rescue her child. Zeus, Persephone's father, allows this to happen, and this situation reflected what real mothers and daughters went through in that time period, with fathers being able to just marry off their daughter and moms not being able to do anything about it and potentially never seeing their child ever again. And then this feminist modern version character assassinates the mother and romanticizes the kidnapper. Honestly, I'm not even mad that this story did that. The author can do what she wants, even if it's not my preference. I mean, I enjoy Disney's Hercules, and it makes Hades the bad guy, and everyone's like, Hades isn't as bad as Zeus, and Zeus is the good guy. You know, like, I'm fine with you doing what you need to do for your story. I'd personally be more fine with making Hades a better person in this one, since it's a romance and people love the story of Hades and Persephone as a romance. But you don't have to character assassinate Demeter to do that. But I digress. My issue isn't necessarily that the story made those changes. It's just, it's not a feminist retelling. And I noticed this trend of shallow stories being called feminist retellings, where, if anything, a lot of those stories I feel like make the female characters less interesting and complex than the original versions. Like, I find a lot of these feminist retellings to be less feminist than the original stories. But anyway, Demeter's character is assassinated, and at one point after the 10-year jump, she stages an intervention to berate Persephone, and Hades is there as a moth and stops it by transforming back into his human form, which he is not naked like Persephone is every time she turns into a butterfly and changes back, so kind of weird. And then instead of just taking Persephone home to recover from like the emotional distress of that situation, he publicly proposes to her right then and there when Persephone is in emotional distress and crying right after she has already previously told Hades that she wants to be independent for a while and just date before they get married. He completely disregards her feelings and takes advantage of an emotionally distressing situation to propose to her. And it permanently ties the memory of his proposal to the memory of her mom publicly humiliating her. And it kind of reflects how Hades was going to propose to Minthi when completely ignoring what she had told him about their relationship. And also, it's just like leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Like, do you want your engagement to be tied to such a horrible event? And then Demeter eventually sort of gets redeemed, but it's dumb and I don't care, so we're moving on. The last point I want to touch on in this webtoon is that it brings up nymph racism, and it's done so poorly. So in this world, there's the gods, which are the most powerful, and then there's nymphs, which are all female, and they're like connected to plants and like bodies of water, and they're the lower class. And in the story, the nymphs, which to be fair, the gods are kind of like this too. All the characters are kind of like this. But the nymphs specifically, the good nymphs essentially exist just to unquestionably love and ship Hades and Persephone, and those are the good nymphs. And then the bad nymphs are the ones who don't ship Hades and Persephone. Their lives can just revolve around Hades and Persephone. Hades is the king of the underworld, and he tortures a satyr who is also lower class than the gods, and he constantly intimidates his workers, even making one woman afraid she'll be fired when she points out Persephone can't open a bank account without an ID. She's just doing her job, and Hades is constantly throwing his weight around to intimidate people. And it's clear that he just treats Persephone special, and he treats everyone else like garbage, specifically the lower class. He also treated Demeter horribly previously and is only trying to be nicer now because he wants to date her daughter. But even then, he's not particularly nice to Demeter, but he was like horrible to her before. Then Persephone, who was supposed to be the good person, once she marries Hades, becomes the girl boss version of him. Persephone then punches down on the working class after this. She is mean and rude to a satyr who was once mean to her in college because Hades, her boyfriend, almost beat his roommate to death and removed his eyeball, so I don't really blame the satyr. And then Persephone also intimidates a nymph who is trying to steal Hades and breaks into her house with wild animals to destroy it and threatens her. Which the second one is more reasonable because this nymph is trying to be a homewrecker and steal Persephone's husband. But Persephone never acts like that towards anyone who is her equal or who deserves it more because she only punches down. And the satyr didn't deserve it at all. I also don't like that the nymph is being used to try to steal Hades because in the original myth, that was his first wife who he loved, who unfortunately passed away and turned into a tree. But this is the cliche romance trope that the man can never have loved before the main character. And honestly, this webtoon kind of does every bad romance trope. It has protagonist-centered morality. It has like cheating with the main character, cheating with her love interest. And then it has like the mean girls trying to steal him. Also, it would have just made more sense if Minthi was the one who tried to steal Hades and that he was a widower, but I digress. But yeah, so at the end of the day, Lore Olympus, I feel like it did have potential, and there's some really creative stuff involving like the fantasy aspect that I really enjoyed. I love the dichotomy between modern day Olympus and the underworld with ancient Greece on Earth. I think that's such a cool like setting, but unfortunately the story kind of ends up being every bad romance trope. Anyway, though, I just want to say that I did read one more romance book at the beginning of this year. I actually was the first book I finished this year that I started last year. But turned out it was a lot more explicit than I expected. And I don't really read explicit content or talk about on this channel, and I don't really want to start now, but I did read one more book than I said. But I can conclude from that just making characters hot for each other isn't enough to make me like them as a couple. So it's not my thing. I will say that all 3 books I did review are smut-free, so they got that going for them. That's my preference. And I think that if you're interested in romance without erotica, that you could go with any of these, even though I didn't particularly care for this one as much and spoiled everything. This one I would recommend the most. This was the best one I read, which makes sense because it's like one of them was literally a movie adaptation. Anyway, that's all I'm going to discuss for now. I've read so many books this year, and I'm trying to catch up with my reviews, and I plan on reviewing all of them coming up. Anyway, that's all I'm going to discuss for now. Thank you for watching this video. Have you read any of these books? Do you want to pick up any of these books? Are you a romance reader? Do you have any books you'd recommend? My next books I'm reviewing are not romance, but I hope you stick around and enjoy that. That's my usual taste. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.